Thanks everyone for joining us here today at the Project Censored Show. This is a brand new segment and we're calling it Frame Check. We're going to be exploring the intersections of pop culture, news, feminism, all through the lens of critical media literacy. I'm Kate Horgan. I'm here alongside Shealeigh Voitl and Reagan Haynie today. We want to set the stage for what's to come on this podcast. We're going to dive into where the name Frame Check comes from, how it relates to our program. We want to talk a little bit about junk food news, what's happening in pop culture today that's distracting us from other major things that are happening. And a lot more. So first, let's introduce ourselves. My name's Kate Horgan. I'm the website and media design assistant at Project Censored. I started this journey with Professor Allison Butler at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and she kind of brought me into this critical media literacy world. I worked on the book, The Media Me, with her and also with our director, Mickey, and our former associate director, Andy. And then I also did the VINS assignment in our classroom, which I think we all did in college, which was really eye-opening and introduced me to Project Censored formally. And then I did a summer internship. Again, I think what we also all did with Project Censored. And since then, I've been working with them, doing all sorts of behind the scenes work. And now we're here on Frame Check. Reagan, do you want to tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, so my name is Reagan. I am Project Censored social media manager. So I run Facebook, Twitter, also known as X, but we don't call it that here, TikTok, and Instagram, if I didn't mention that. And yeah, like Kate said, I also got involved with Project Censored through one of the classes that I took in college. I went to Loyola Marymount, and my advanced public speaking professor, Kara Pearson, assigned State of the Free Press, our annual yearbook. And yeah, ever since then, I've been actively involved with Project Censored. I got a summer internship, and here I am. So yeah, Shealeigh, do you want to
Yeah,
chime
hi,
in?
I'm Shealeigh. I'm the Associate Director at Project Censored. And I feel really excited about this new segment. I also got started with Project Censored as a student, so it feels very full circle to now be talking about some of these things that first got me interested in the project's mission, and really transformed the way that I read news as a young student at North Central alongside Dr. Masick. Ever since I've been involved with the project, we've been working on developing critical media literacy tools and resources, one of which I developed with our colleague Andy Lee Roth called the Frame Checking Guide. And that sort of got us thinking about how we can talk about some of these topics that Kate and Reagan and I spent a lot of time in different meetings talking about junk food news and pop culture and things that we were really interested in. And frame checking is really, you may have heard of the term fact checking. I think a lot of people talk about fact checking to weed out mis and disinformation. But there are subtler forms of news slant included in news reporting that might be easier to miss. And that is where frame checking sort of comes in and becomes a really useful critical media literacy tool. And so the guide that Andy Lee Roth and I worked on walks readers through the use of visual frames, so how news photos can shape someone's understanding of a news event, and linguistic frames, so that includes elements of headline construction, and also like other activities that talk about quoted sources in a news story. And so getting used to noticing these sort of narrative strategies will help us even as we navigate online spaces where information gets even murkier. And we see, these framing techniques all over the internet in health and wellness spaces, in YouTube videos, Mr. Beast's content, which is often framed as like philanthropy. But
True.
most of the time, most of the time it's like exploitation. And so, we talk a lot about framing. especially when it comes to junk food news. And I think Reagan has some things that she would really like to talk about when it comes to framing and junk in particular.
Yeah, so I think framing is really derived significantly from Herman and Chomsky's propaganda model, which illustrates how the media filters their information and the media that they're pushing through these 5 different filters. I'm sure most of our listeners are probably familiar with the propaganda model, but if you're not, some of the filters are um, advertising interests, so the for-profit model of corporate media, and then fear of flack, so fear of pushback or negative response. They also prioritize elite interests and elite perspectives. And I think the prioritization of elite perspectives is really well illustrated in the media's portrayal or the media's reporting of Mahmoud Khalil's detainment. I was recently reading CNN, and their coverage of the detainment was really interesting. What I found was that they really prioritized this sort of valuing elite perspectives, like from the Trump administration, and putting them on the same level as sort of the perspectives of Mahmoud himself. And what this does is that it kind of obscures the truth of what's really going on. And so the reader comes away like more confused than they were going into it. So instead of, fact checking or questioning the Trump administration's sort of portrayal of the events, like claiming that Mahmoud was a terrorist sympathizer and that the Columbia students were getting funding from terrorist organizations and that they have Hamas sympathies, that really doesn't check out when you actually look into the movement itself and also what Mahmoud himself has said. And it is the media's job to do those things, like Shealeigh was saying. And this also applies to junk food news and the way that the media sort of prioritizes junk food stories.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what junk food news means? We're very familiar with the term in our State of the Free Press book that we put out every year. There's a junk food news chapter, so we talk about it a lot. But just for our listeners who might not know, do you want to define a little bit what junk food news means?
Yeah, so junk food news is essentially like the pop culture stories, the sort of spectacle stories that we all sometimes like to read. They're not necessarily informative or educational, but they really like to emphasize, celebrity scandals or, what's going on with Elon Musk and his antics. Some of that is real valuable news, and then other times it's like hyper focusing on Elon Musk's child picking his nose and mouthing off to Trump in the Oval Office, which we might talk a little bit about later on. But yeah, it's just the sort of celebrity news, Kardashian scandals, things like that.
Yeah, and I mean, junk food news too. Like, I think when I first got involved with the project, I was like, am I like an irresponsible news consumer because I enjoy like reading about celebrities and pop culture? And I think everybody gets, something out of entertainment news. I feel like that's, especially young people, we're just always online. We're always on, TikTok or whatever. And all of that is celebrity culture. All of that is pop culture. But the junk food news chapter, what I always really appreciated about it is it doesn't shame the pop culture reader. It really encourages them to examine the ways in which the corporate media is letting them down and distracting them from the things that will affect them in their daily lives. And I think that's like what's really important to remember is like the corporate media is really good at covering what happens today, but not every day. That was one of our Project Censored judges, Robert Hackett, said that. And it's so true. It's like these things are rooted in sort of these systemic inequalities, and they're harder to keep tabs on, I guess, for the corporate media than, the celebrity news that we see, just kind of passing through.
Oh, yeah. And even like, it might be like just as easy to keep tabs perhaps on like non-celebrity news, but that is going to get more attention and views and clicks and things like that. And you made a good point too when we're talking about this, like to be kind of like critical, and when we kind of examine these things from this like critical lens, it's not necessarily to be critical in a negative sense. It's not necessarily to shame, because we all consume pop culture all the time. Like that is what my feed is made up of. I think what distinguishes our conversation here is that being a critical media user, having that literacy, is just being able to like take a deeper look at what's coming to you, you know, the who, what, where, when, why of what you're seeing in front of you. There's a great quote. I always tell people this quote. Cheryl MacArthur, she had this piece called Black Girls in Critical Media Literacy for Social Activism. She said, "We do not have a choice about whether our students will be engaged in media consumption. So our choice about teaching students to be media literate should be an obvious one." And I think this just applies to so much. It shows us that this is how like news gets to us. We can't analyze and talk about politics and social justice issues and the things in our world in this day and age without talking about how these messages get to us and why and by who, because that's the world we live in. It's mediated.
Yeah. And also, I mean, we've talked about this like extensively too, is like we're all digital natives. We've all grown up on the internet. So we also think and we have this certain sort of confidence about what we feel we're immune to in terms of like the mis and disinformation or news slant that happens, or slant in general that exists online, because we're such intuitive media users. And I think it's like really hard to go into it with that sort of confidence because technology is evolving so quickly. Algorithms are working in ways that we're maybe not always aware of. That's why algorithmic literacy becomes really important. We're just kind of like always trying to catch up and like figure out these these multiple forms of literacy, and it's becomes even more important when you're online all the time, like we are, you know, like Kate said, we are those users. We're sending things in our group chats of like memes and pop culture news, and but there's also like part of that too that's really important of like there are ways in which those pop culture stories are being misrepresented. Like we think about like Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively being reported as like a celebrity feud when this is like a story about workplace harassment. And so it's like that stuff, even like unpacking those issues that reflect like larger systemic issues. And again, a way that the corporate media is misleading us.
Well, not to jump to a completely different topic, but I also think, Kate, what you were saying about being sort of a conscious consumer, I think that really everybody could benefit from really thinking about what they're consuming. And again, like the point of this is not to shame people for consuming junk food news or consuming pop culture, because we all do it. We're all guilty of that. And it's also just like we're human beings, like we're social animals. We love to gossip. And that applies to why we consume pop culture news. And but I think, yeah, with that, I think that there is this sort of this feeling amongst people, especially in America or like Western societies, where we're starting to feel very negative about the world and life. And I think that that reflects, that's partially because of the media that we're consuming. So, you know, when you open up Twitter or when you open up Instagram or TikTok and you're consuming a lot of sort of junk food news or celebrity gossip, you know, even politics sometimes, like the amount of news and insane stuff that I come across on a daily basis about what's going on with Elon and the Trump administration, that can feel productive, but you also have to really like listen to yourself and look within and, you know, think about how it's making you feel. And it's okay to get offline for a little bit. It's okay to like detach, because ultimately that's going to help us when we're engaging and when we're trying to think critically, because trying to consume as much as possible is not a productive way of engaging with the media. So yeah,
Absolutely.
I think, yeah, all of that said, just be a conscious, mindful consumer and be intentional about it.
Before the break, we were starting to get into a discussion of critical media literacy, junk food news, frame checking, setting the stage for what's to come on this podcast and some of the things we want to talk about. Now, Reagan, you briefly mentioned this right before we went to break, but one of the most prolific elements, I think, of junk food news right now is Elon Musk. I think there's like a odd thing happening when a tech mogul and a former reality TV star are on our television screens, whatever, as like active leaders, if you will, in this country. Is so jarring because it's blurring this line almost of pop culture and politics. What do you guys think about this junk that's happening?
It's a bummer.
Yeah, it sucks. Like, one thing I want to point out is that, like, the leader of our country, like Kate said, is a former reality TV star. Like, we kind of have like a junk food news pop culture character sitting in the White House. And it's not like that's just his, I mean, we all know Trump. It's not his former self. Like, he's actively engaging in spectacles all the time. And so again, it's like there's a fine line between junk food news and real news, and it's really hard to decipher between the two. And same with Elon Musk. Like, we've been talking a lot about the Tesla, Trump buying a Tesla and promoting Tesla, because, you know, the stocks are like in the toilet, in the gutter right now. And so, of course, he's trying to like help out his guy, Elon. So yeah, Trump's now buying a Tesla, even though he actually, I thought a few years ago, he hated electric vehicles and was like furiously, adamantly pro gas vehicles. But now he loves them. Huge
Well,
fan
that's
of
the thing.
Tesla.
They're never going to say, like, corporate media is not going to, like, take the time to go back and be like, but also remember when he said he didn't love electric vehicles? Like, they're going to run with this because this is a great spectacle to report on. But also, it's such a terrifying spectacle to see, like, a car show happening in front of the White House is crazy. Shealeigh, did you have anything to say about it?
Yeah, everything's computer and and I mean it's just like really ridiculous. I think we like spend, you know, I saw like a headline in the New York Times the other day about like, you know, what like Elon's suit says about like Trump and power. And it's like, you know, and I mean it was just like an, you know, a report about how like what Elon is wearing inside of the Oval Office, you know, like what that signifies in Trump's relationship with him, and maybe a certain kind of demotion because he's been wearing these T-shirts and now he's wearing a suit. And it's like, you know, it's these kind of things. It's like these the Tesla parade and like the what he's wearing inside of the Oval Office. It's like these sort of headlines and these sort of like news reports are like, while we're spending time doing that, while we're spending time covering that, we are neglecting like how terrifying it is that, you know, these billionaires are, you know, like have this incredible influence now on our political system. And so that is something that obviously we have seen like some kind of reporting on that. We've seen like Bezos and Zuckerberg and Elon Musk being covered in their relationship and ties to President Trump, but not nearly enough. You know, not nearly enough,
No.
and not nearly substantive enough, because it is, the implications are very scary.
Well, and I think it's really important to point out here is that this issue, while it's being covered in mainstream press within the last year, maybe, it's been, I mean, we've all, I don't know if we all, but many of us have heard the phrase techno-feudalism and the concept of technocracy. But this has been in the making for years and years and years. Like, in reality, the corporate media should have been reporting on this 10 years ago, 20 years ago. But now we're playing catch up, and it's having like really dramatic effects. Now we have, Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk in the White House. Jeff Bezos is now getting rid of sort of adversarial op-eds at the Washington Post. He owns the Washington Post. We have not only Elon Musk in the White House, but also he's completely backed and supported by Peter Thiel, which we could have a whole episode on Peter Thiel. We could do a lot about Peter Thiel. But I think it's really important to call out the media for their lack of reporting on this for the last 20 plus years, because that's the reason why we're in the situation that we're in today, because there's no accountability.
Totally. And not to mention Zuckerberg, like as soon as Trump's in office, making amendments to fact checking and things like that, and just the rollback of that. But also, I mean, just back to this Tesla thing, is that there's so many other issues with Tesla beyond Elon Musk as well. We are centering around boycott Tesla. Like, we're seeing people protesting at Tesla showrooms. And I don't know how much corporate media is talking about that, but it's mostly tying back to Elon Musk and as a protest against this billionaire's involvement in the government, his policies, what he stands for. But it's completely ignoring labor issues that happen within Tesla, how Elon Musk's broader entrepreneurial endeavors are like actively about to like fund military. I think there's like been discussions about contracts with between having Cybertruck's involvement in the military. There's a lot more context to why Tesla is bad and why the entity that is Elon Musk and what he stands for and what he is trying to bring to the forefront of our country is really scary. And I think that corporate media often misses that a lot. They're not always diving into those other issues.
Yeah, and that's actually that is like a perfect example too of why, for listeners at home, like making a frame, you can imagine making a frame with your fingers and just like putting it on that image of Trump and Elon in front of the White House, in front of the Teslas, and you see what it looks like in that frame. And then everything that's on the outside of it is like the labor issues and what Kate mentioned about, militarization and climate issues and all of these things that are being, dismissed as a result or favored, fallen in favor in terms of like, now we're just focusing on the entertainment of like these two goofy guys that have more power than we could possibly imagine. And so it's like that, that is where frame checking really comes into play. And we can talk about like the lateral reading of like, you're reading a news story and you can click on another tab and you can go and read more about these different things. But it's as also simple as like looking at a picture and being like, how is this cropped? How is this taken? What angle was it taken? And how does that influence the way that I see this news story? How does it shape my understanding of this news story? What's in the background? Like, is there maybe something outside of the frame that I'm not seeing? And like asking those questions is like really important. But like, that is like where frame checking I think comes into play, is like you see something and then there's all of these things on the outside, just like Kate mentioned, these labor issues in terms of Tesla and all of these different things that we are not paying attention to as a result of being fed this junk.
Well, and just bringing that back to another point about Trump and Elon, it's really important to critically think about who is being selected to cover issues, who is being selected to report on issues within corporate media. But if you look specifically at the White House press pool, it came out, I think, maybe a month ago or a few weeks ago, that Trump is now hand selecting who is allowed into his press pool. So he's really prioritizing, of course. And to be fair, a lot of other presidents have done this as well, but a little bit more discreetly. But President Trump is now hand selecting journalists that are favorable to him. So you'll even see, just watch some of the press briefings. You'll see him being asked questions that are maybe that he finds to be offensive or questions he doesn't like. And he'll ask like, where are you from? okay, I don't like that question. Moving on. And then he'll, hand select somebody from News Nation, and he'll be like, oh, he'll sit there and like applaud them and flood them with compliments and, clearly state, oh, I like this one. This guy's so much better than that last guy that just asked, So it's just, again, another spectacle, but also real important, something very important to critically analyze.
Totally. And like you were saying, like, then when they report on that story, when you, the reader, are reading this article in the New York Times or whatever corporate media outlet, they're reporting on the questions that were answered, because all they can do is give you what he did say. They can't give you what he didn't say. And if he's not answering questions, if we're only allowing those perspectives to be given, we can't know what his stance is on these other things. Like, if he doesn't want to talk about something, he's not going to talk about it. So then how does it get to us, the readers? Not through corporate media.
And that they're not going to sit there and apply the context and critically analyze. Even CNN and MSNBC, like, they very easily glaze over these things. Like, they don't look at, what are the implications of this? Like, how is this going to affect the information that you're receiving? Because in a way, they're also guilty of these things. So then they would have to apply the same criticisms to themselves. So you have to, that's another interesting point, but that's kind of tangential. But yeah, Shealeigh, you looked like you wanted to chime in.
Well, I was just going to say too, like, he's been doing this since the beginning of his political career, where he like floods the system with all of these like outrageous things and like outrageously distracting things that like the corporate media gets like amnesia about, like some of the really, really, really important stuff that like will further marginalize people and harm people in this country, vulnerable communities in this country. And like all of the different things that he's done to like push us further and further and deeper into a climate crisis. So it's like it's so scary that like the corporate media, obviously there are certain things that make sense that like we're covering these outrageous things that he's saying, but then to what degree to what time and like should we be devoting to that trivial stuff that we maybe we should be like focusing more on some of the stuff that will affect us in a real and serious and dire way.
And not to backpedal again, but you said something that reminded me of some points Kate was making earlier about Tesla as a military contractor. And it's not just Tesla, it's also SpaceX. And again, this is not getting critical coverage from the corporate press. I mean, it is a little bit, but it should really be front and center, because a lot of people make the point of, oh, Elon is entering the White House and he's doing it because he's selfless and because he genuinely cares about this country. And he's actually lost money. He's losing money by helping Trump in the White House, which is not the case. It's not reality. But also, it is so unbelievably concerning that we have a military contractor, side to side with Trump, arguably has more power over Trump than Trump himself. And again, the corporate media is not critically analyzing that. Like, SpaceX is actively profiting off of the war in Ukraine. It's also profiting off of the war in Gaza. And again, the corporate media is essentially silent on these issues. So
absolutely. Two things about that is that being a billionaire will never be selfless. And something that Allison Butler always said, and I will say this again and again, the absence of data is data. And I think that summarizes a lot of what we've been saying here today. We're really excited to be able to keep having these conversations with you all, to be a part of the Project Censored show, and to keep kind of giving a spotlight on these junk food news stories. So we'll have plenty of other things. We definitely won't just talk about Elon and Trump, because wouldn't that be horrible? But we're wrapping up here. You guys got any parting words?
Yeah, thank you for listening. Please stay tuned. We're really excited to be talking to each other like on the Project Censored show. I think this is like something that we've been hoping to do for a really long time, because as we're colleagues that are inspired by each other, we're also friends that talk about junk constantly. So it's cool to be able to talk to young people like ourselves, that are interested in the same stuff we are.
Totally. And even
Yeah.
if you're not young people.
No, I couldn't agree more. And also, just a little side note, please follow us on our social media pages at Project Censored. We would love to hear from you all and get your perspective. And thanks for listening.
Absolutely. And things we mentioned today, like the frame checking guide, you can find that on our website at projectcensored.org. You can find a list of independent news sources so that you can tune into things that aren't the corporate news, which we've talked about the pitfalls of this whole episode. Again, that's projectcensored.org. Follow us on social media. Thank you so much for having us on the show. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.